Hey, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon and welcome. Gary Jacobs. We'll introduce ourselves as we go. I've got my two colleagues here with me, Aidan Morrison and Sean. And we'll introduce ourselves in a few minutes, probably what we do, who we are, why we're here. But let's just give a few minutes for any latecomers to join us. But thanks very much for everyone who has turned up so far, and particularly those who were with us about 6 weeks ago for our first in the series of our Creative Smarties, Effectiveness in Advertising. It was good to see so many faces then, and had some good feedback, which is why we're here today. So tell us who you are, tell us why you're here, tell us where you're calling from, who you are. In this we can't see you. You can see us, but we're slightly blind to who's out there.
So, we can see your chat messages though, so please feel free to tell us where you're from, all that kind of stuff. Feedback is always good.
We would like, as much as possible, like this to be an interactive session with any questions as we go. We're going to be running for around about 35-40 minutes, and then allow ourselves some time for questions and answers at the end. But if anybody wants to direct message me or drop an email afterwards if you're interested in what we've been talking about. But the whole thing of storytelling seems to be quite a hot topic at the moment, which is why it seems that we've got so many people that are interested in coming along today. So I think over 300 people have signed up. So hopefully we'll get to see a good many of you here today. Hey Jess from Lincolnshire. Thanks for joining us. Hope all's well with you. And Ahmed
from Iraq.
From Iraq.
Hey, welcome.
Welcome. Good. There's lots of stories to be told. Hopefully, will be of interest to you, Ahmed.
I wish I'd learned about commercial storytelling at 16 years old. That wasn't even slightly in my consciousness at that point in life. Good work, Ahmed. Wow. Yeah. Sorry, I'm pronouncing your name wrong.
But Aidan, I know we're going to be talking about this, but you've been delving in the whole area of storytelling for many years.
Yeah. So as well as my work with FKC, I've been kind of quite keenly interested in human transformation for a long time, and the two things really dovetail a lot. So I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, and I do work as a coach and various other things. So this this idea of the stories that we tell ourselves, the metaphors that we work within, and the stories that happen within our lives have been of great interest to me. It's one of the most compelling things that happens to us as human beings. So and excited to talk with everyone today about this.
It's good to see Helen. Hi, Helen Belaz from Hungary. Good to see you joining us from around the globe. So I think, guys, let's get started. And we've got Birmingham in as well. Israel. It's good to have you all here. So thanks very much for joining us. As I said, start with welcome. Thanks very much for joining us today, and particularly any of those of you who were with us a few weeks ago for our Effectiveness in Advertising. And this is just a one in the series, and hopefully you'll find the content of good value. I know I've been learning as we've been developing this, even though I've been storytelling for many years. It's always good to learn new things. Let me introduce my colleagues here. So I'm Gary Jacobs. I'm CEO of FKC. And let me talk first to Aidan. Aidan's going to be talking about the psychology and the neuroscience of storytelling. But Aidan, if you just tell us a little bit about yourself quickly.
Hi, everyone. So I'm the business director here at FKC. I'm going to be your guide for part of this, and my colleague Sean is going to be your other guide as well. So Sean, would you tell the folks what you do, please?
Yeah, I'm the head of creative at FKC, and so I'm responsible for all the creative output and a great deal of storytelling, which I'll tell you more about later.
Thank you. Okay, before I hand over to Aidan, when we decided that we were going to use storytelling as a thesis or the basis for today's webinar, it opened up lots of new insights for me in particular when I started looking just online about storytelling. It's incredible how storytelling is into our lives, but actually how much used in advertising. Now we've been using it. It's just a matter of course the way we develop our concepts and our work for our clients. But it is such a strong pull emotionally into how to actually get better engagement with your brand. And suddenly I start getting storytellers getting in touch with us once we started pushing out the fact that we're running this webinar, the fact that there are people that just do storytelling. And I know that you'll find storytelling in theatre, you'll find storytellers who travel around the country, particularly talking to young children. And it's an amazing way of developing the essence of a brand and a product sold. But storytelling has been going on the dawn of time, and Aidan will talk a little bit about this back from when people used to hand stories down and how it would help with pathfinding over the years. But even now, all the way through to today, whether it's everybody talks about the John Lewis TV commercial, everything is about storytelling, and everyone has a story to tell. But what we see is frequently the art of storytelling is lost in the quest for sales, and the two things have to work symbiotically. So it's about how the essence of the story can really make your brand come to life, and how you don't lose sight of the hero in the story. And as I said, Aidan will talk a lot about the hero's journey. So Aidan, as I said, is going to talk about the psychology and the neurodynamics of neuroscience of storytelling. And then Sean will actually explain with a couple of case histories how storytelling can really bring a brand to life, get the emotions rolling. And it's the nuances in those stories that often capture the imagination of your target audience, or your consumer, whether it's B2B or consumer themselves. So I'm going to stop now and hand over to Aidan to continue the journey and the story.
Thank you. So you're probably all sitting there wondering what we're going to cover today. Well, sort of starting frame, your time's valuable, our time's valuable, so we're going to make sure that it's not wasted. We've packed this webinar full of what we think is pretty useful insight. And so we're here to talk about story and how we can use story to help connect with your customer in a way that helps really create emotional connection, greater resonance, and moves them closer towards your brand. Why would we want to do that? Well, we get hired to create better commercial outcomes for the businesses that we work with through their marketing. It's pretty much that simple. So whether it's ROI, return on ad spend, average basket size, frequency of purchase, higher conversions, or improved customer loyalty, whatever it is, creating a positive emotional experience with your brand can influence all of these. And story is what humans have used for really since the beginning of time as a way of conveying meaning using emotion. So in our webinar today, we're going to look at the 4 elements of any story. So breaking it down to its most simple, basic components. And we'll look at how that pans out over a real client example. We're going to hear the link between ancient poetry, viral TikTok videos, and head lice. And we're going to get to grips with how making your customer the hero of their own story pays back and what that means for brands. And then we're going to uncover the algorithm that runs across time, space, and culture. And this may well have been the original meme, to borrow something from Mr. Dawkins. And then we're going to do some questions at the end, so a bit of Q&A that anybody wants to ask. So we're big fans of simplicity at FKC. And if you strip storytelling back to its very bare bones, there's 4 essential elements. So we need a setting. This is either literally or metaphorically their world or where they want to be. Although sometimes we may kind of start at the end and then work up to it. A really good current Western example of that is Better Call Saul. They do that kind of stuff pretty well and pretty regularly. TV show, for anybody that's not familiar with it, on Netflix. So secondly, we need a character. So our hero needs to be in there. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the webinar about who the hero really is, because there's a really important point there that often gets overlooked. And setting in a place on their own don't get us particularly interested. So we need conflict to give us motion. Motion creates emotion. And it's not just any old kind of conflict that we're looking for. The conflict essence that we need to show is the gap between where they currently are from a psychographic point of view. They've got a problem, they desire something, they want to be somewhere else, and this creates a conflict. Now, if you just think for a moment in terms of your customer, and obviously appreciate there's a lot of agency people, on this call today, so great, think about your customer's customer. If there's no problem, if there's no desire, or there's no change in status, these are the 3 main, most motivating things that cause humans to buy stuff, then they won't take action. And taking action is prime, right? That's the most fundamental thing that we're doing as agencies and brand owners. We want them to buy our product. So that conflict creates tension and emotional engagement. And the tension needs completion. We're looking for that kind of completion moment to make things satisfying for us. So we need a resolution. And usually if you're selling a product or a service, that's showing how the product or service solves your customer's problem in some way. That can be explicit or it can be metaphorical. That's the kind of artistry part. And what we're talking about today are the elements of the underlying structure that creates and compels the interest and the action that we're looking to create. So this can be cut many different ways, but using the same underlying principles, you can shape it in a number of different ways, but we get the same outcome. We get the same kind of neurological response. So let's have a look at a kind of non-traditional story. It's a video example from a TikTok creator. And if you could roll the video, please, James.
Excuse me, sir. No food or drink allowed. The museum's policy is really quite strong.
So not every story starts with a narrator or is necessarily even what we might recognize as a traditional story. So this was created by Zach King. He's a TikTok creator who makes videos that get staggering view counts, so in the multi-billions when you aggregate his total numbers of views. Some of his videos have done in the billions in themselves. And as you can see, this is not a traditional story, but it has those elements. We see a setting, the art gallery, and we see the characters. In this case, they're obviously the farmer and his wife from American Gothic, which is possibly, arguably, one of the most famous American artworks. We've already got a conflict because we can see that it's them, but it's also not them. And then that conflict continues by Zach playing with the kind of tension between the still and 3D representations. And there's other kind of mini conflicts and resolutions within the video as well. So those kind of multiple setups and multiple resolutions, that's what keeps people scrolling and scrolling. So the little dopamine hit that we get when we get the resolution of the tension, or the shock when there's a violation of expectation, which is essentially what he's doing with dynamic between still and 3D. And then when you get the resolution, that payoff's even better, so you get an even better hit of dopamine. And that kind of encoding of information using emotion and using this, this kind of biochemical reaction through tension and release, it's something that we've been doing for like a really, really, really long time. So going way back to pretty much the dawn of history for the Aboriginals in Australia, they've been using stories to navigate across thousands of miles of outback. And people who've, in their culture, people who've never been to a location, could be hundreds, thousands of miles away from where they live, they're able to navigate across this unknown territory because of the way that the features of the landscape are encoded into their stories, being woven into tales that they tell each other, growing up. And it's how they can do these massive walkabouts and know where they are, even in territory they've been to, which I personally think is amazing and remarkable and also pretty ingenious as well. So in our world, in the rest of the world, in the kind of Western world, but also in the East as well, culture and morality have been transmitted through story for millennia. Whether it's stories from the Bible, stories about the Buddha, or even going back further to the stories of the Vedas, the 5,000-odd-year-old historical text that gave rise to Hindu religion. So stories, we've been using stories to shape behavior for millennia. And as well as these kind of large-scale consensus building type operations across populations, we can also use the elements of story to ramp up consumer demand for products. So I'm going to hand over to Sean, and he's going to take you through a fascinating tale of revitalized brand fortunes and the story that made it all.
Hello, if we can turn the slide. So this is a packet of Fisherman's Friend, and they are a client of ours. You may or may not have heard of them, but inside that packet, you'll find some small lozenges, which are famous worldwide for having a very big kick, and people either love them or hate them. And their story started, and their company started in a place called Fleetwood in the north of England, which is a small fishing town. And the unique and original blend of eucalyptus and menthol in those lozenges was first concocted by James Lofthouse in 1865. And it was a remedy he came up with for the local fishermen who were suffering from congestion after being out on their trawlers. It then, of course, grew and grew and grew, and now it's a multi-million-pound company worldwide. But when we were talking to them about this particular ad that we're going to show you, the brand was very successful in many different international regions. But in the UK, the sales were static and awareness of the product was slipping. So this needed remedying. So when we were asked to make this TV commercial, it was quite interesting because there's a singing star called Alfie Boe, who you may or may not have heard of, but he's very famous in the UK. But at the time, he was on that upward trajectory of fame. He was just starting to become famous. And what was interesting was that Alfie's personal story epitomized the sort of plucky northern character of the Fisherman's Friend brand. And he was actually born in Fleetwood. So there's this fantastic connection between this rising star and the city where Fisherman's Friends came from. And in actual fact, his story includes the fact that one of the owners of the company helped Alfie in his singing career and helped to sponsor him to get an education in singing. So there was this great rich story already behind the relationship between this singer and Fisherman's Friends. So we thought, well, who better to revive the brand, for a brand that's revived so many other people with its strong tasting product. But one of the things that was a challenge to us was that the regulations around TV advertising meant that we couldn't claim a medical benefit from this product, even though most people think there is, but technically we couldn't. So our storytelling had to be careful not to claim too much. We had to infer it and say it with pictures rather than words. So if we turn the slide. So linking to what Aidan was saying earlier, there are key important parts to the storytelling that we always try to adhere to when we're making a TV commercial or anything for that matter. There has to be a location and a setting for it. There has to be a hero. There has to be a sort of dilemma that needs solving. And then the brand becomes the facilitator and comes in to rescue the day. So in this case, the scenario was that Alfie Boe was in a dressing room, happened to be in New York. But basically it's just before a performance and he's doing his vocal warm-ups, but the vocal warm-ups aren't going too well and he can't hit certain notes and his voice is cracking a little bit. And this is a classic situation that Fisherman's Friends can actually help with because they help you breathe more easily and get that vocal cords going. So he just happens to have a selection of Fisherman's Friends products on his dressing table, along with a load of Fisherman's Friend and Fleetwood paraphernalia that obviously comforts him when he's out on tour and so on. So there were lots of little signals that this was a connection between Alfie Boe and Fleetwood. He takes the Fisherman's Friend and the music and his voice suddenly explode and he hits this incredibly large note, and this is all a result of the Fisherman's Friend. And the note is so enormous that the room starts to shake, the ceiling starts to fall down, the mirror on his dressing table cracks and splinters, the stagehand that comes in to tell him that he's ready to go on stage, his glasses shatter, and all this chaos happens around him. And he's just sort of left at the last minute going, oops. And he didn't realize the strength of these lozenges and what it would do to his voice. And so Fisherman's Friend, being the facilitator, have averted this disaster of him not being able to sing that evening and given him the strength to sing this incredible note and get back to his best voice. And then at the very end of the ad, we also have a very famous British actor and a bit of a hero, a guy called Sir David Jason, who's got a very, very distinctive voice. And he delivers the end line, which is fisherman's friends, talk about strong. And so everything is very British, very much in a tradition of Fisherman's Friend as a British company that they're very proud to be part of that society and everything. And so it links in very well. The humor of the ad is also quite traditional British humor as well. And in a lot of sort of comedy sketch shows, you will get this situation where you've got a dilemma that's everything's going to go wrong, and then the hero comes in and solves it. So it's absolutely classic storytelling. And the ad was so successful that it ran for 3 years in a row. And the sales force of Fisherman's Friend were absolutely astounded, because the sales of Fisherman's Friend went up by 25% in the UK during that period, which is the biggest rise they'd ever seen. So a simple story had worked very well and entertained people and encouraged them to buy the product. So without further ado, I think we should show you the ad.
Mobile, qual piuma il vento, vento.
Fisherman's Friend. It's the rousing menthol and eucalyptus that hits the right note.
5 minutes, Mr.
Oops.
Talk about strong.
So there we are. Over to Aidan.
Thanks, Sean. So prior to today, some of you may not have thought that there was much in common between classic literature such as the 10th century poem Beowulf, Alfie Boe, Hollywood blockbusters, and head lice. Well, there is. There's an underlying pattern, an algorithm, or framework, if you will, which, if you follow it, it gives remarkable results. Obviously, whereas an agency, we're quite results focused. We're going to cover why it works in the way that it does. And this pattern's, it's particularly interesting, it's particularly resonant because it's really a mirror of the human experience. So quick question for everyone watching. Who's ever had the experience of things being fine, a problem coming in, having that kind of moment of crisis where it seems that the problem's insurmountable, and then someone or something, an idea, a person, or just a new way of looking at things appears, and you're able to vanquish the problem? So most of us, in fact, every single person has experienced this at various points in their lives. It's a part of the human experience. It transcends cultures. It runs across experiences. If you've ever seen any of the Star Wars films, watched or read Harry Potter, been to the theatre, or watched The Lion King on DVD or Netflix or wherever you might see it, read the Bhagavad Gita or the Tao, watched a Spider-Man movie or watched The Matrix. So all of these stories, they all use a story structure that was first identified by an American writer and professor of literature and comparative mythology, a chap called Joseph Campbell. And so he discovered there's this pattern that runs across cultures. It runs through all sorts of different types of stories. And we can use this to engage audiences really well. And the basis of this is really quite simple. Gary, can you flip over to the next slide, please? So yeah, the kind of principles of this are really simple. Your customer is the hero, not your brand. Your brand is kind of Yoda in Star Wars, or Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, or Rafiki in The Lion King. So you exist as the guide in their world. And those of you who joined the session that we did on Insight way back in January, I know some of you here today, so thanks for joining us again. You'll remember that one of the most important things that we really want to understand is, how does your customer think and feel about the problem that your product solves, or the gain or the status increase that it creates for them? And when we have this, when we understand this, we understand the gap, and that gap is really crucial. So Campbell, his work covered anthropology and mythology of different cultures, and across numerous different locations and across many different eras. He's distilled all of his work into a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And the basic premise of this is there's this thing called the monomyth. And that's the idea that all mythical narratives are variations of a single great story. So the theory is based on this kind of pattern that exists underneath the narrative elements of most great myths. And that's kind of regardless of time of creation or place of creation. Now, whether it's 100% accurate, there's debate around that. That doesn't really matter because it's translatable into a really, really successful commercial structure. George Lucas, he credits his work in developing the story arcs for the original Star Wars trilogies on Campbell's work really directly. He talks about it quite explicitly. All the other films and stories that we've mentioned also follow this structure. You don't have to use this structure, but when you do something quite interesting. And that's kind of what we're just about to get into. So, the question, an interesting question, I think, is how can we use this to engage our customer or our prospective customers emotionally? If we could flip to the next slide, please. Thank you. So brands, as I mentioned, sometimes we get it wrong by making the brand the hero of the story, when of course it's our customer, it's our prospective customer. The brand kind of exists as the facilitator or the guide rather than the hero. And it's really simple. Your customer is the hero of their own story. We can't change that. They battle the problem that you solve for them on a regular basis. And understanding this framing and how they perceive the issue, how it causes them to relate to their world is really essential, which is, obviously why we were talking so much about that within the Insight webinar. So your customer is the heroine of their own story. They're, Luke Skywalker, Simba, and your brand's Rafiki or Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it starts with the call to adventure. So I'm going to there's a lot of kind of components to the whole hero's journey. We're going to break it down into 3 really kind of core elements. So we start with this call to adventure. They learn a lesson. They're able to do things differently because of their interaction with a guide. Hint, hint, that's your brand. And then they win that victory. They win a victory with the newfound knowledge, and they return home transformed. So these kind of 3 main stages, look at that kind of momentarily. So we've got this departure, that's the leaving of the familiar world. That's the realization of the problem, effectively, or the realization that they want something, they want a gain, they want a change in status, which brings us to the point of the abyss or the initiation. And that's when the heroes has to come into conflict with the problem. Through the help of the guide, they're able to resolve that, which brings us to the 3rd kind of main component, which is the return. And that's when the hero returns to the familiar world, but the world's changed, or they've changed, the world's changed with that as well. So when we use story, we want to set out this kind of arc. Either it's literal, as we mentioned, or it's metaphorical. It doesn't necessarily matter, and that's going to be down to the creative treatment and what have you. But there's that conflict there, and we use the conflict to bring the viewer right inside of the story. By showing them this and by really understanding where that gap is and where those tensions are, you're suddenly inside of their nervous system. You've activated all of the neural networks that light up whenever they think of the problem or the outcome that they're looking for. So that tension gets us right to the emotion, and it's sort of like almost a kind of a short circuit in, basically. Without that understanding, we don't know what to do accurately to get them to take action. And obviously in our world, it's all about creating action. It's all about creating results. So even though the advertising that we create might be entirely positively focused, it's not the 1980s where we've got everything in flashing red and it's all, you must do this, otherwise you will die type stuff. Even though it's entirely positively focused, it's really important to understand this kind of place of where they are, where they want to be. And when you articulate that in a way that resonates, that's really the thing that kind of gets people engaged with the brand, that gets them emotionally engaged. Quite simple stuff, really. So why does it work as well as it does? Well, aside from what we're talking about in terms of the kind of neurology of in human beings, we go through this arc all of the time. So if you just think in your own life, where's this story arc showing up for you right now? Usually we've got small versions of it that happen on a kind of short-term basis. It could be navigating the tube on the way into work, for example. There may even be longer-term versions. I've got a really interesting story arc that's just appearing in my life literally right now. So my partner's pregnant, 9 months, we're over the due date, and she said to me just before the call, she's like, it's starting. So I can finish this call, I'm going to go to hospital, and we're literally at the start of an entirely new story. I'm not the hero. I'm just I'm one of the other characters. She's the hero of that story. So, you know, if you just think in your life, you know, these narrative arcs, these story arcs, they turn up. Perhaps it's in your relationships right now. Perhaps it's how you're engaged with your work in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps it's something that's going on with your clients. They're here, there, and everywhere, and we start to, you know, when we start to kind of notice them, it's like, oh right, okay, I can see that this is occurring all over the place. And so when we use that, again, we're connecting with people at a very visceral level. And that's, you know, when you're into this kind of deep fabric of human experience, that becomes a very powerful attractor to your brand. So I've got another question. Who has had head lice? I have. It was a long time ago. Probably got that to come. Who's had kids with head lice? And, you know, any parent that's gone through that process knows how challenging that can be. So I'm going to hand over to Sean. He's going to talk us through, use this narrative structure to help parents, not just in the UK, but all over the place, to realize there's a better way to deal with those pesky varmints. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Aidan. I hope you don't have to rush off too quickly. All sounds very, very imminent. First of all, I just wanted to answer a question by Carol Savage. And she said, does every story always have to be based on a crisis? And I think that it depends on your definition of the word crisis. Because I think in advertising, I want a pizza could be classed as a crisis. And that's probably something that we would work upon to create a dilemma that we fulfill the need as the facilitator, as the brand. So I think we may be making it sound quite dramatic in our case studies, but generally there's a need that needs fulfilling, and we have to prove that the brand is the answer to that need. Now, in this case, we're talking about a product called Vamoose, which is a head lice treatment. And at the time when we met them, it was just about to launch in the UK. And it was in a market with some very strong competitors. So it was important that we got the job right, really. So we did some research which highlighted that head lice in kids was an absolute nightmare for parents. And many had found that existing treatments were hard to use, they were ineffective, or they just simply found that the problem just came back almost immediately. And that's largely because they were killing the lice with their treatments, but not the eggs. And if you don't kill the eggs, then the problem won't go away. Now, the Vamoose formula claimed to kill 100% of the lice and the eggs, and also within 15 minutes. So there's some pretty strong stuff to go with there. And of course, from our point of view, the name of the product, Vamoose, was just absolute gold, because it just started our creative juices flowing immediately. So we've immediately started speaking like cowboys in the studio with Vamoose, you know, being a kind of cowboy parlance. And we got very quickly to the idea that a Western film genre would provide a great vehicle for an analogy of lice being out of control, as if maybe they're like bandits in a town, and that we needed a hero that was going to solve this problem, and that became the mum. And in this instance, the sheriff of the town is the mum, and she's packing new Vamoose in her holster rather than a gun. So the interesting thing here was that the client couldn't afford a high frequency campaign. So we needed to route the TVC in a sort of category so that it immediately, we got the name across very, very quickly in the ad. So that was something else that we had to think about carefully, is to get the name across and what it did. But as we said before, there's always a series that we go through. You have a setting, and in this case, we were talking about an imaginary cowboy town. And the way we started to think about it was that we might have live action people, but integrating with cartoon characters in an animated world. We had the hero in the sheriff, and we had the villains who became the head lice gang. And this was going to be a battle between them, a battle that had been lost so many times before, but this time would not be, and the sheriff would prevail. And then the conclusion of it all is that Vamoose kills 100% of the head lice dead. So what we've got here on the next page and next couple of pages is the actual storyboard that we created, well before production. And you won't be able to read the writing, but I'll take you through it quickly. And so in the very first few seconds, we used a subject line and made it like a film title. So it said the head lice gang are back in town. So we were using the Western film genre and the graphics and the typeface to sort of bring to life the scenario. Then we have the Jeopardy starts to come in, and we see there's a mum and a daughter in this saloon, and a little boy runs in and says, "Mummy, mummy, the lice bandits are back in town." And so we now know there's a problem. Immediately we're introduced a bit more to the fact that Mum is the sheriff, and we introduce the brand because the logo, the Vamoose logo, is on her belt buckle, and she tightens that up because like a gun belt, but of course her gun belt's going to have Vamoose in it instead of a gun. But it's a good way of getting the logo across very early. So we've already introduced the situation and what we're talking about, and very early in the ad we've introduced the brand, rather than just wait until the end of the ad to mention it. So then we find that we go outside in the street and we see that the lice gang are running amok in this town. They're just doing whatever they want. They're breaking things up and everything. But Mum goes out and confronts them, and we have this classic Western scenario with the shootout. And at first the bandits look like they don't care. They're going to win. They've always won before. Every other treatment that Mum's tried has been a failure. But this time is going to be different because Mum's packing new Vamoose, and she blasts them with the product. And we see that then we cut away to an actual treatment shot. So we're very keen to see the product in use. So you probably can hardly see it, but you can see the foam going into the little boy's hair. And it's such a quick shot, but it shows actually how easy it is to apply the product, because often other products are messy and horrible to work with. Of course, then her shot at the lice gang basically kill them all in 15 minutes, and they're all gone. So then we get to the return to normal life, a lice-free life, because the brand has been the facilitator and helped the hero achieve what she needed to achieve. She even has the confidence at the very end of the ad. It's a very small touch, but again, you'll see it when we show you the ad. But the little boy has her cowboy hat on, and she takes it off and puts it on her head, which sort of, shows that she's got the confidence to wear a hat that he's worn, and that she's not going to catch lice because she's used new Vamoose. And at the end it says, and we actually used a real cowboy to do this, believe it or not, to do the voiceover. He said, "Vamoose, you varmints." So the whole thing was quite rich in storytelling. It was fun. We had great fun creating the characters of the lice bandits. The actors played their parts really well. But the whole theme of it was very easy to extend into other areas. And so we did trade advertising. We did an online game that kids could play, like a shooting up game where they were killing the head lice gang. But one thing that's really, really interesting about this is that this storyboard that we've just shown you, Vamoose went round to all the major multiples who at the beginning were really not interested in stocking the brand. They felt like they had enough head lice treatments on their shelves. But when we showed them the storyboard and they heard the name and the whole package, they just were so excited about it that they were then calling back saying, "We really want to get this product on our shelves because A, it's an exciting and different brand, and also we know that you're going to make this TV commercial which is going to support it as well." So even before the ad was made, it was achieving success in getting these listings on the shelves, when often that's a really hard thing to do with a brand new product. And lastly, I'd just say that we're very pleased obviously with those results, the sales were unprecedented for a brand that was new to the market. And even sort of, we should even mention that we happened to win a few awards as well. We kind of cleaned up in the best marketing on a small budget category. So again, I'd like to, having waffled on about it, here's the actual ad.
High noon for headlines.
Mom, the headlights gang is back!
Yep, those pesky headlights were back. Town had tried many things but could never get rid of them. But the sheriff was packing new sharpshooting vamoose to finish off those headlights for good.
Vamoose, you varmints!
Within 15 minutes of contact, 100% of the lights and their eggs were dead. So if headlights come to your town, say vamoose, you varmints.
We had so much fun with that real cowboy, I can't tell you. Anyway, over to Aidan.
So we're just going to do a quick recap and we're going to open to questions. So as we've seen, there's 4 elements to every story, and that's the kind of most reduced version that we could come up with. We've seen that stories are the original viral media, and I'd really suggest that it's so useful to kind of look at how you can start using story to kind of expand your brand's reach, improve your conversions, all those kind of things. And as Sean pointed out, it's not just consumer facing story activity that can work really well. It can also work well in the trade. I mean, we work with a number of brands that are listed with major retailers, and we also work with a huge nationwide retailer. And it's challenging with the buyers. Anybody that's in that space knows how challenging it can be. So get it right, you can actually turn those tables, and I think that in itself is really powerful. And this concept that if you do the hero's journey bit well, if you really kind of get these elements in place, you're inside of your prospective customer's nervous system, and that in itself is a great way of actually helping compel action, helping them move to do the things that we want them to do. Gary's going to mention an offer to brand owners to talk to us about the stories that you're maybe thinking about in terms of your customer, your brands, that kind of thing. So I'll let him sort of expand upon that. But we're always really happy to talk to you about how this stuff can work. We enjoy it. It's interesting, and we'd love to talk to you guys. So thanks.
Good, thanks, Aidan. Thanks, Sean. Guys, stay with me for a little while, please. Aidan, I'm glad that you've been able to delay your story into parenthood a little bit longer, and I know it's been a bit of a challenge this week, thinking is it going to happen, isn't going to happen, and the fact that you're able to speak articulately, particularly from the psychological side, or as you say, the neuroscience side, about how storytelling can really embed itself into brands has been really good. And Sean, I know you get very excited about talking through some of the commercials that we've produced. And I think it's interesting to say Carol asked a question about that you answered about, does every story have to be a crisis? One person's crisis of headlights is somebody else's. It's their jam, whatever the expression is. But your pizza analogy is, I want a pizza and I want it now. I want it delivered in 10 minutes, not in 20 minutes, like some of the other brands do. So it's always about finding the conflict in the individual that's actually going to help that story to really sing. There's a couple of questions that I'd like to ask. Again, guys, if any of you have got questions that you want to field to the team here, please do put it in the chat. But one thing I'd like to go back on is, Aidan, that you in fact, both Aidan and Sean, you've been talking about storytelling, and what we've been showing are consumer commercials. How does that work for a tech client or a B2B or a financial or high-tech piece of wizardry? I mean, does it work as well in business to business as it does in consumer?
Good question. So the answer to that is your customer, whatever, if you're in B2B, it's still the same dynamic. So your customer wakes up every day thinking about this problem that your product solves or your service solves. If there's not a need for it that's problem-based, if it's gain-based, you're already at about 50% less likely for them to take action. So we are way more compelled to move away from a problem than we are towards a gain. it's literally twice as much. Really good example of this that I quite often use is if you bought a brand new car, you bought yourself a new Tesla, and you break your leg on the way to go and pick up the Tesla, you are going to go to the hospital before you pick up your new car. That's just the way that we're wired. So when we understand that, when we understand what the dynamic is, whether it's a B2B brand that's selling an IT infrastructure type product, or whether it's a consumer brand selling something that's retailed in the beauty space, when we understand that dynamic, we can then use that to articulate their world and the challenges they currently see it, or the gain that they're looking to create. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, we see B2B. There's so much of it is boring to boring. An example from our history that we used the kind of storytelling device was with Cvent, event registration, huge business. They were struggling a little bit in the UK, and we went and really deeply dove into what their customer was experiencing in terms of frustrations, where they wanted to be, and put together some nice work that kind of met that, and it really worked very well for them. So it doesn't have to be boring to boring. It doesn't have to be just focused on a list of benefits or what have you. When you can use what you know to actually get into creating some sort of story, then those brands inevitably start leading their peers.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I would add to that it doesn't matter whether you're a consumer or a business, business client talking to other businesses. They've still got needs. They've still got things that they require, and they have problems that a brand can solve. So whether that's a physical product or whether it's a service that's invisible, there's still challenges that need solving for people. So, and like Aidan says, I think sometimes business stuff is guilty of being a bit dull, and I'm not quite sure why, because I don't think it really needs to be. And I think that there are dramas in people's lives, whether it's work related or home related, that you can still apply the same logic to that.
Okay, thank you. Ahmed's just put a question up. I don't know if this question is clear or not, but does your story have to represent your brand identity, or do you stem your brand identity from the story you've chosen in the first place? And I know you'll be gagging to answer that, but just in terms of your brand story is your brand story, and that's the story that creates the engagement with your consumer in the first place. And you may have a brand story, but you may sort of have product stories that go alongside your brand. You may have tiers of different products within your brand. So I think there are a number of stories that you can tell, and one doesn't necessarily have to drive the other. But Aidan, from your point of view, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, well, I'm just thank you, because that's such a great segue into what I was just literally thinking about. So let's just go back to something that we talked about earlier, which is your customer is the hero of the story. So the founder's origin story, why did you start your business, should start with, I was looking at my prospective customer. I was looking at something that I saw in the world, and I saw an opportunity to help. I saw a problem. I saw a gain that wasn't being met. I saw a status increase that could be created. A really simple example is the About Us section of websites that tend to focus on the business rather than the customer. It's that kind of stuff. So when we're looking at how do we tell these stories, we want to be focused on centralizing the hero, and the hero being the customer, and then building the narrative around it. So sometimes it's a little bit of a flip, and it's a case of digging into, well, what, as the founder, what was your origin story, and how do we make it really relevant to your customer?
I think that's interesting, the way that you answered that initially about your customer is your hero. So if you started your business, you've got to look at why you brought your product or service to market. And this is epitomized in Nick's question of, should brands focus on the benefits they offer, or should they make the message high level, like Nike Just Do It, or some of the powerful Apple ads, or is it a balance of the two? So it's what's the important point? Is it about the fact that Apple make great computers, and it's about the way they make them? It's the whole Simon Sinek's why, rather than how we make it or what we make. So I'll repeat the question as you get there.
I'd like to answer that in that I think that there are different types of advertising, and the story can sometimes be quite literal, like the ones that we've shared today, or the story can be the story of the brand and the brand identity. So I think with the examples that you've mentioned, like Nike and Apple, they're showing a lifestyle that brand gives you, and an attitude to your life that you may well share with that brand. So that a lot of the Nike stuff that we see is very lifestyle-y. It's showing a lot of different people. It's showing a lot of empathy with different people, and saying that Nike's not just for athletes, it's for you and I and millions of other different types of people. So they are sort of getting a benefit across, but in a fairly subtle way that's in keeping with a brand that's, partly is a fashion brand, and it's about, being flavor of the year, not just the month, and flavor of the decade. And I think that it's subtle, but it's still there. And I think that a lot of ads try to get too many benefits across, and it's a bit like throwing tennis balls at people. You throw 10 and they won't catch a single one. You throw one and they will catch it. And I think brands are very guilty sometimes of trying to say too much in their 30 seconds or whichever media they're using, and often then the viewer can't focus on the most important message. Those brands do it brilliantly, and Apple, are known for incredible design, beautiful looking products, and therefore the ads that they make are generally, product based, showing you how gorgeous it looks. It's growing, that need, that crisis. I want the new Apple iPhone, I want the new laptop, and it's growing that desire for the products in a very sophisticated and elegant way, but in its own way, in a simple way, it's telling a story.
I think just to tail on to something you're saying there, Sean, as well, Apple's advertising is really secondary to the way that they just present what they do. So, the Apple, I forget what they call them, their conferences, the webinars that they do where they introduce new products, that is story based. That's something that Steve Jobs perfected, and he's held up as a really good archetype as being a great presenter. And then I think the other point that Sean was making is just an interesting one to pick up on. So much of the high street is often trying to cram so many messages into every piece of POS that you see out there that, you walk into some stores, not our client stores, and stuff's just jumping off every fixture and fitting at you with, so many different messages. So there is something, we see these brands that really get the simplicity, then get the storytelling. They're generally elevated way above their peers, which is interesting.
An interesting question from Aidan there about, can your brand successfully run two different stories? The story hero needs to be different, though the setting is the same. I think that there can be a danger if you try and tell two different stories in the same ad, but it depends. In some ways, like we're making a film right now for a brand that needs to appeal to potential staff. They want to recruit new staff, but at the same time, in the same film, they want to get a message across to their customers that they've got amazing staff and that they're, really sort of state of the art and right on the forefront of technology. So we have created a story that, by subtle use of the script, means both to both parties. You're essentially creating a film that's about a brand that looks very modern, innovative, sexy to work for. So that means that you take that message out whether you're a customer or whether you're a potential new member of staff. So it is possible to do it. I think it depends on the situation. But the most important thing is not to try to tell too much in one ad.
So it's interesting that you've presented two commercials to us this afternoon, both 30 seconds. And Aidan, you just mentioned about Nike and Apple. In fact, they have a lot of money to spend. Not many clients these days have the budget to go on TV. They might be able to run content online as YouTube pre-rolls or as Facebook or Instagram stories, etc. But how can you tell a story in an MPU or in a skyscraper or a banner ad on a website, as well as we've demonstrated how you can sell it in a 30-second TV commercial?
Well, I think the first thing to remember, if you're just talking about just purely digital ad units, so we're not talking about video, we're just talking about banner, then you don't need to tell the whole story. All you need to do is get your hook across. And if you think of like kind of clickbaity type websites, they've done that really well for a long time. But the idea that you get the attention with your hook, and then you bring them over to your landing page or to your website, and then you actually deliver the rest of the story. So as long as we've got tension or some sort of intrigue, that gets them through.
Sorry, Aidan, I know you'll love this question. Helen's just asked, what if we haven't got a story to tell?
Everyone's got a story. Everyone's got multiple stories. So I appreciate, it's an interesting thing, because sometimes when confronted with new ways of looking at things, our mind kind of goes a little bit blank. But one of the things that we do as a business is we start uncovering, well, okay, where are these real dynamics? Where's the stuff that makes that unique point of resonance? Where's the compelling thing that our clients do that, from a positioning point of view, when we start telling that story in that way, suddenly it's like, things light up and interest and intrigue starts happening. So I would say every brand has a story, but every human being has really, really interesting stories. And I've worked with, so many different startups and kind of brands over a really long period of time. And there's always interesting stories. Doris from, the media team that's having this amazing thing happening in her life. That's great, compelling content that actually from Aidan's point of view, some of those stories that contextualize you as a bunch of humans that are out trying to help clients and clients and candidates, those stories immediately get inside of people's nervous system. Here's how we went and really made it amazing for this candidate.
We're running out of time. I'm going to just wrap up. We can let all of our guests win their way for the rest of the afternoon. So thank you, Aidan. And Aidan, good luck with the story of parenthood. I hope the birthing goes well and that you will have a part to play in it.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Secondary part, we've got dealers and various people on the birthing team. So
sure.
I'll be chief foot massager.
Yeah, and Sean, thank you for your time this afternoon as well. So that leaves me to wrap up. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Aidan said earlier on that I had an offer to make, which is basically, if you do want to talk about your brand story, or if you haven't got a story that you've been able to develop or evolve, then I'm very happy to talk about it. We have I hate the word free, but we have a consultation where we're very happy to sit down with you without any charges in the first stages. One of the messages that came up on LinkedIn from a user is that it's great to see stories being told so well. And I think it goes back to what Helen asked, is what if we haven't got a story? There's always a story. And if you haven't got a story, and as I said in our last webinar, if you haven't got a USP, you've got to create an emotional USP. And creating that emotion starts to build a story. So it's there. It's just finding how to get to it and how to tell that story, whether it's in a 30-second commercial or it's in a banner, whether it's on your website, however it may be. So thank you very much for coming. Really do welcome feedback. If anybody wants to DM me or email me, you've got my details there, garyj@fkclondon.co.uk. And any thoughts about next webinar, we'll aim to have another one before Christmas. Please do let us know. But it's been thoroughly enjoyable putting this together and telling our story. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. Cheerio.